Yeah, thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Mark. Like I say, I'm a bookseller here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, a few things. I wanted to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming many authors, including Laura Coates and Soledad O'Brien on Monday, February 5th, and Chuck Klosterman on Tuesday, February 6th. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and you can also sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Today, we are delighted to welcome Daniel Levin Becker in conversation with Casey Jarman. Daniel was an early contributor to the groundbreaking lyric site Rap Genius, now known as Genius, and author of many subtle channels in praise of potential literature. He is here today with his brand new book, What's Good? Notes on Rap and Language, published by City Lights. What's Good is a hybrid of lyrical analysis, freewheeling liner notes, and a love letter to the most vital American art form of the last half century. In the book, Daniel considers how rap's use of language combines slang, rhyme, quotation, irony, in-jokes, and philosophy, celebrating the pleasures and perils of any attempt to decipher its meaning definitively. As he says in the introduction, essentially, if you're reading this book, it's too late, as rap as an art form has already moved on to new and exciting possibilities. Joining Daniel in conversation, we are delighted to welcome Casey Jarman. He is the author of Death, An Oral History, and has written for The Believer, Portland Monthly, Willamette Week, the best weekly Portland paper, amongst others. This evening's event will include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If you see that someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, you should upvote that particular question. Perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Daniel and Powell's by purchasing a copy of What's Good. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening. Okay, on with the show. Feel free to clap at home. We can't hear you, but nevertheless, please welcome Daniel Levin Becker and Casey Jarman.
Hello.
Thanks everyone for that deafening applause.
It was kind of like an Arsenio hoot that I heard in the background there.
A lot of hooting, yeah.
A lot of hooting.
Pretty racy at one point.
Yeah, it did. We had to shut it down. How are you, Daniel?
I'm pretty good.
Good. It's early.
It's very early. So early it's late.
It's a continuum. It's both early and late. How can it be? Well, I am excited to chat with you about this book, which I've been kind of slowly reading for years, and as we've kind of gone back and forth about it a little bit. It's such a fun book. It's so packed with love and trivia and playfulness and sort of meta narrative that I've had a really good time reading it. And I just wanted to kind of start out by just asking you, this book it lives between worlds. It's kind of brought up in the introduction, but it's not exactly an essay collection. It's not exactly an academic text or personal history or hip hop history. It's a little of all of those things, and it's its own creation. So I just wanted to ask you to, right off the bat, what made you want to write a long form piece about hip hop in particular, and how did the structure of this thing start coming together for you?
Yeah, that's I have to like get into the time machine, because this has been about 10 years in the making. When you're saying you've been reading it bit by bit for several years, and like so many people who I've told about it coming out have been like, yeah, like I remember when you first told me about this project, like how young we were then. It's like, yeah, no, it's really been a saga. I think the idea came, I used to write about music a lot. I used to review albums and concerts and just sort of be in that critical pseudo-journalistic world. And at one point noticed that rap was just really my favorite thing to write about, but more importantly, just sort of think about, kind of grapple with intellectually and work on understanding it. And the way that, some years before I burrowed into the indie rock scene and got to know the labels and the acts and who was in multiple bands and what side projects were linked to, like that sort of rabbit hole was, hip hop was a really satisfying, I was finding it was a really satisfying world to do that with also. And around the time that I finished and published my first book, Many Subtle Channels, which is about something completely different, it's about French literature, I think part of me was looking for what the next book project was going to be. And I, you know, sort of tapping into my love for music writing, my love for music period, and my not wanting to walk away from a challenge, like just trying to wrap my head around something so sprawling and hydra-headed and also just wonderfully engaging as hip hop felt like the thing. And I think it never stopped feeling like the thing, although there were moments where making it a book was like, actually the first time I told my agent about it, she was like, "That's cool. Does it need to be a book?" I was like, I mean, I guess not, but that's what I want to make it a book. Like, it's an excellent point. I think you told me like something about the layout of the book makes you think it should also be like a 90s CD-ROM.
Yeah, I was thinking about those CD-ROMs with the little multimedia clips strewn throughout, where in a certain section you click and it gives you a grainy 10-second video of, a famous speech or something. I could see this transferring to that format.
The rap game Microsoft Encarta. So yeah, that was, I think that having that idea in my mind that like, I wanted it to be a book, but maybe the book wasn't naturally the best shape for these meditations to take, I think gave me some plasticity in terms of thinking about like, if it's going to be a book, what kind of book is it going to be? And as I first started putting it together, the initial shape of it was something much more conventional or maybe scholarly. Like it was going to be, let's say, 8 or 10 pretty long chapters that were big, robust themes like quotation or slang, and for those of you who haven't looked at the book yet, it's 50 short chapters, each of which is about a single rap lyric. About or kind of kicked off by.
Right.
And there was just a moment where I discovered that was, I think I'd been grappling for a while with the shortcomings of these bigger chapters, these bigger, more ambitious, kind of more responsible to their own internal coherence, that I was finding limiting, and took a step back and said, okay, there are all these different songs, there are all these different lyrics that are really what I want to talk about. Like my aim is much less to make any totalizing arguments about slang, about quotation, or how these work. Like really what I'm passionate about is just the words themselves, is these rhymes, these passages, these images, the storytelling. And so I had this moment where I was kind of like, what if the book accommodated that desire more? And I think from there that felt like something clicked together,
like an organizing principle of some
exactly.
kind.
Yeah.
I often thought throughout the book that here's a guy who really, really loves words, really loves language, and loves the puzzle pieces of how language changes and fits together. And it almost seems like you looked around and were like, well, where is all the most interesting language happening? And that was rap.
Yeah,
that's not a question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that like I do make some totalizing claims. Like in the introductory chapters, I talk about how I think it's the most exciting and exhilarating use of language in in the English artistic world right now, which I do think is true, but I don't want to make it sound like I don't think there's also really compelling, energizing uses of language happening in other places. But yeah, there was a certain heat that I think I was drawn to, and that like, whereas if I were going to write a book about indie rock lyrics, I think those moments of doubt where I was like, is this really something that I want to tease an entire book out of? Probably would have been more frequent. Whereas in rap, it was just like, there was never a question of conceivably running out of material.
Yeah, it seems like the question that you do grapple with a lot in the book is more, where is your place in this universe, and what are the things that you feel like you can bring to the table and share with your readership. That to me, I think you talked about in the book, there was a quote that I pulled out that said, and you mentioned it earlier, that you consider yourself a critic. And I was thinking about how I know so many people who they're like, oh no, I'm not myself included, who are like, no, I'm not a critic, I'm a writer.
You just crush a lot.
Yeah, I'm not a critic, I just crush a lot. I wonder, and also because this book is kind of spiritually, it's a critical undertaking, but it's also very clearly and objectively the undertaking of a fan. And you talk about your fandom so much in this book. So I wonder, like, when people use the phrase, hip hop community, I know, where do you see yourself fitting into this giant puzzle, and how does your critical voice and your fan voice play into the Daniel Levin Becker that wrote this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know what, like, a lot of people, when I would tell them about this book, this project, would ask, are you interviewing a lot of rappers? Do you know a lot of rappers? Is it historical or is it portraiture? And the answer is no. Like, one of the things I had to reconcile myself to was that, I can probably count the number of rappers I know personally on one maimed hand, as Nabokov would say, and that's okay. Like, this is the story and perspective of a listener who, there's a lot going on in my brain when I listen to a rap song, and that's what I want to share. And I think there's something about the ethos of the hip hop community, which is, like, I feel like it's extremely welcoming to people who, whatever they bring to the table, as long as they're passionate and skillful, like, that's it. You're accepted so long as what you're bringing is genuine, and like, it's sort of up to you what niche you can carve out for yourself. So I haven't thought about it in those terms before, but I feel like there's no less a place for a critic than there is for a CNN anchor who interpolates rap lyrics into his reportage, or children's book author who wants to write about, like, there's so many ways of expressing love and engagement. And I do, like, there are parts in the book where I talk about how some of them I find hard to buy, and others I just, take at face value as, like, the difficulty of questioning other people's motivations and their sincerity, and then expecting that questioning to be turned back on myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as a critic, like, it's not, I think criticism doesn't feel like it's as ingrained a part of the economy of rap the way it is in a lot of other kinds of music, the way in, like, jazz or rock. Like, criticism is just sort of this apparatus that is both parallel and has a lot of interplay with the musicians. Rap, I think, looks a little more askance at the whole critical impulse, but
those are haters and biters.
But I think that, like so many other things about rap, is kind of like, it's rooted in truth, but it's also kind of a posture, and that just makes it all the more interesting. Like, there's a Method Man line. There's a Method Man line where he says "fuck a rap critic." There's a Jay-Z line which I ended up not including in the book for rights clearance reasons, but he says "fuck critics, you can kiss my whole asshole." It's like, yeah, that sentiment is very present in a way that I don't think you would have in a rock song, like, within the song itself.
Right.
Maybe Guns N' Roses or something like that.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But I think, like, that sort of belies the inclusiveness of this community such as it is, where like if criticism is like your way of emceeing, it's your art, then that's fine.
Throughout the book, you reference other book projects, other essays, other people. I mean, there's a lot of in sort of hip hop fashion, like it's a very referential and interwoven text in a lot of ways. And I find myself, some of my heartiest giggles were when you were talking about some books that have been written about rap lyrics that, you know, without naming names or dragging anybody into it, are basically like translating rap to, you know, your average person. Here's what this means. And you had some fun with like kind of talking about the way those books sometimes fail. And I wonder if you, in putting this, while you're reading other people's books on hip hop and considering the pitfalls of writing a book about hip hop, I wonder if there were like categories that you would put books on hip hop into that come to mind, like the ways in which hip hop books go terribly wrong, that things you knew you didn't want to do.
Not consciously. I mean, I think mostly it was things that I knew I wasn't qualified to do. Like, I'm not qualified to write a history of hip hop. I'm not qualified to write sort of a musicological book about it. Like, there's Dan Charnas, who wrote this book called The Big Payback, which is a great long history, very like narrative history of the beginning of hip hop as a business. Just I think the same day as What's Good put out a book about Jay Dilla, the producer from Detroit, and it's called Dilla Time. I'm only a few chapters into it, but it's wonderful so far. And it's like he's swinging for the fences at, like, not only as a historian of the life of this figure who he argues changed the sound of rap and a lot of other kinds of music accordingly, but like musicologically, he's sort of arguing and justifying why he thinks Dilla was such a special innovator. So that sort of thing, like, to go back to your earlier, or our earlier point about what the role of the critic is, like, I sometimes had to remind myself that, like, I wasn't trying to make any proclamations, make any pronouncements about what rap is, what it means, why it's important culturally. I think, like, it's hard to write about something for the length of a book without gesturing in those directions. But I'm not a social theorist. I'm not a historian. I'm not a musicologist. Like, I'm just a guy who has these nerdy obsessions and loves trying to externalize them in a way that I hope is engaging. But I don't know, like, one thing I noticed, for instance, every academic book that I've read, every scholarly book that I've read about rap has a few sort of fetish rappers. Like, everyone agrees that Rakim is amazing and that Jay-Z is important and that Kool Herc and Sugarhill Gang and blah, 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 but also, like, Pharoah Monch is the shit. Or, like,
they pick their favorites.
Yeah, they just sort of have their pet artists that they want to promote. And I wonder if I do that. I sort of tried to be agnostic in that way. Like, I think it's pretty obvious when you read the book who I like and who I don't, and that I don't have any, like, vested interest in promoting anyone over anyone else. But yeah, no, I don't think I was.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There was one section where you're talking about a particular book that I won't name, and you're talking about this, like, voice that the author uses of, I think you referred to it as, like, fuddy-duddy English translation, where people, like, take a very slang-heavy line from a rap song and translate it in this egg-headed professorial fashion that I read as one of your pet peeves as I was, reading the book. And I think your book is the exact opposite of that. Like, you're joyfully going through tropes, going through slang, but there's never really a part of the book. You'll break down how lines work and how lyrics work, but you're not, though you are a translator, that is one of your major roles in life. I think you engage that in a really artful way in this book.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that book, that shall remain nameless, really is like, I mean, I tried to enter this world as humbly as possible, because like I know what I want to bring to it, but I also am very aware of my sort of newcomer status. And like there's some books that I like more than others, but I never really felt any, and some people who I think are better writers than others and better listeners than others, but I kind of made a point and also just naturally respected everyone's approach as equal, except there are a few books where like I think they just get under my skin because they are exaggerating the kind of vernacular difference between rap language and proper English.
Right. For effect, like in a patronizing
translation you're describing. And what I think is more offensive is that like it just shows this complete lack of curiosity. So it's so unengaged with like why, like there's this book that we're talking about, like there's a Paul Wall line that it quotes. It's he says, "Show my fronts," and he's referring to Paul Wall as iconically wears metal grills on his
bedazzled teeth.
It's more carrots than Bugs Bunny's lunch. So he's playing on the word carrot as a measurement of purity of gold and the vegetable. And this book just takes that line and glosses it, and just saying, like, look at the anterior bicuspids and note the resemblance to the midday meal of a lagomorph or some, like, and just completely fails to engage with what's happening in that line. And I think that's like, why would you do that? Not to ascribe this person any negative motivations, but like missing the point in that way seems like such a pity to me.
Yeah, missed opportunity if nothing else.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say we? This is going to be a partly musical journey here in the remaining 35 minutes of this thing. So, what say we jump into a song if our audience doesn't mind us actually listening to some tunes and then doing some readings?
With everyone's indulgence, let's do. I'm going to share my screen. Unfortunately, the first song that we've chosen to listen to does not have a music video. It's the Notorious B.I.G.'s "One More Chance," which exists in two versions. There's the single version, which does have a video, and then there's the album version, which is what I talk about in the book. So we're going to listen to the latter. Share my screen, and then I'll read some of the chapter around this song.
All you hoes calling here for my daddy girls a dick. Like that, mommy?
Hi, Daddy. How you doing? This is Saeed. I was thinking about you last night. You acting like you can't call me no more because you're busy and all of that, but you trying to tell me it wasn't good? That shit is real fucked up what you did. I hooked you up with my girl and shit. You fucked her every time you see her. You don't say shit to her, you know what I'm saying? And all that bitch do is call me all day talking about you. Why the fuck they don't want me? Yo, big, this is Quita. Kenya told me she saw you and Shane anymore, and I know you ain't fucking her. You fucked with me last night. That's my best friend, and we don't get down like that. Yeah, motherfucker, this is Stephanie. Waiting outside for your ass like a fucking hour. I don't know what's going on. Motherfuckers trying to rob and disappearing and shit. I'm waiting in the call. What the fuck is going on? When you get in, give me a fucking call, alright?
When it comes to sex, I'm similar to the Thriller in Manila. Honeys call me bigger, the condom filler. Whether it's stiff tongue or stiff dick, Biggie squeeze it to make shit fit. Now check the shit. I got the pack of Rough Riders in the back of the Pathfinder. You know the epilogue by James Todd Smith. I get swift with the lyrical gift. Hit you with the dick, make the kidney shift. Here we go, but I'm not domino. I got the funk flow to make your drawers drop slow. So recognize the dick size in these Hawkeneye jeans. I live 13s, know what I mean? I fuck around and hit you with the Hennessy dicks. Mess around and go blind, don't get to see shit. The next batter, here to shatter your blatter. It doesn't matter, skinny or fat or light skinned or black, baby. I drop these beneath for my knees, screaming I pop these. I love it when they call me Big Pop, but I only smoke blunts if they roll prop. But look, I got you caught up with the drunk flow. Fuck taekwondo, I told a fofo for niggas getting mad cause they bitch chose me, a big black motherfucker with G. You see, all I do is separate the game from the truth. Big bang boots from the Bronx to Bolivia, getting physical like Olivia Newt. Tricks up my click pick all day but no trivia. So give me a bankroll and a bag of weed. I'm guaranteed to fuck until I nosebleed. Even if your new man's a certified Mac, you get that H-Town in you. You want that old thing back?
Oh, Biggie, give me one more time.
I got that good dick, girl, you didn't know.
Oh, Biggie, give me one more time.
I got that good dick, girl, you didn't know.
Oh, Biggie, give me one more time.
I got that good. Well, on the 500 SL, the E and J and ginger ale. The way my pocket swells to the rim with Benjamins. Another hunt's in the crib, please send it in. I fuck non-stop, lick my lips a lot. Used to lick the clips a lot, but licking clips had to stop. Cause y'all don't know how to act when the tongue go down below. Keep the funk flow, really though. I got the cleanest, meanest, keenest. You never seen this, stroke of genius. So take off your gym boots and your bodysuit. I mean the spandex, and hit my man next. Sex get rougher when it come to the nut buster. Pussy crusher, black nasty motherfucker. I don't chase them, I replace them. And if I'm caressing them, I'm undressing them. Fuck what you heard, who's the best in New York? Fulfilling fantasies without that nigga Mr. Rock. On tattoo, I got you wrapped around my dick. And when I done, I got the split. Shit, back shots is my position. I got you wishing for an intermission. Fuck the kissing, licking down to your belly button. I ain't frontin'. They don't call me big for nothing. All of a sudden,
Oh, Biggie, give me one more time. Oh, Biggie, give me one more time. Oh, Biggie, give me one more time. Oh.
All right, we're back.
Yeah, do you want to do a little bit of reading straight out of that? That did just remind me of another part of your book, but I don't want to be mindful of time and not get too.
Sure. Yeah, I like took a step back the moment I hit play, or like the moment Biggie started rapping. I'm just like, what a potentially alienating first song for us to listen to. This was that like I try to be mindful of the fact that like I think my mom is attending this event, and like it's a pretty profane song, and I talk about this in the part I'm about to read. But yeah, man, like I think I want to acknowledge, not without contrition, that it gets easy to get so caught up in like how beautiful the wordplay is that I kind of forget that to somebody who's listening to the song for the first time, and they're like, oh my God.
I might make you circle back to another part of the book after this reading, because you talk about that so eloquently on page 185, if my proof is the same as the book. But we can come back around. You should read the part you're planning on reading.
Okay. All right. So the this chapter is called Intelligences, and the quote that each chapter has its own like head quote, and the quote in this chapter is the last 3 lines where he says, "Lick you down to your belly button, I ain't frontin'. They don't call me big for nothing. All of a sudden." Even by today's standards, the standards of a world whose shock barrier has retreated steadily in slow creeps and sudden filthy lurches, a world in which it is the birthright, nay, the imperative of rappers of all genders and orientations to enumerate and commentate freaky sex act and lurid detail, One More Chance is racy as fuck. It's so racy that it's actually even kind of quaint in its singleness of focus on its central theme, namely the unyielding excellence of Biggie's dick. Incredibly, the song's graphic nature doesn't cramp his lyrical gift, a term that is in sort of a gray area vis-a-vis whether or not it also means his penis. Instead, the dexterity works in concert with the TMI. Biggie was the all-time champion of making rhythm itself semantic. And when he says, "They don't call me big" here, he stretches the adjective out for a full quarter bar, making space, taking space, to evoke the amplitude of its bigness. Earlier in the song, he does just the opposite, quickening his delivery as he crams an overlong line into the remaining quarter bar. I'm gonna try to play that part again without sharing my screen.
With the lyrical gift, hit you with the dick, make your kidney shift. Here we go, but I'm not domino. I got to make shit be bigger, the condom filler. Whether it's stiff tongue or stiff dick, Biggie squeeze it to make shit fit. Now check the shit, I got the pack of Rough Riders.
Sorry, jumped around a little bit there. But so he says, Biggie squeeze it to make shit fit. Now check this shit. After that big at the end, the ensuing all of a sudden seems like filler, a glorified throat clearing like yo or come on or that's right. An errant bit of patter, no more meaningful than now check this shit. But suppose you're curious. Suppose you press the point. All of a sudden what exactly? And lock onto some intel you learned from Big L in Ebonics. Ebonics is a song by a rapper named Big L that I talk about earlier in the book, and I'll just play a little. The song is sort of formatted as a glossary of rap vernacular, which I'll just play the relevant moment of here. So suppose you press the point and lock onto some intel you learned from Big L in Ebonics, and all of a sudden the word directly preceding all of a sudden is not nothing, but in fact nutting, which is to say ejaculating. And well, in one swift motion, a moment's pause and rewind, the line at the very end of the song goes from "not for nothing do they call me big," which is admittedly the song's central thesis, to "I certainly didn't get this nickname due to a problem with premature ejaculation." Quite the opposite. Big is in long, long is in the way he's just said the word big. It wasn't a throwaway at all, but an ingenious verbal victory lap, not a spontaneous emanation, but a richly earned climax. I know, I'm sorry. I'll stop. Imagine my delight to discover at the bottom of a rabbit hole some years ago that this maneuver has a name, a pedigree, some disputed etymological elements, a medium-sized Wikipedia entry, all that fly shit that gets the turtle doves hot and bothered. It's called paraprosdokian, which breaks down to against expectation, and it's the same reparse that happens at the end of Take My Wife Please, or outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend, inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. It's trickster deity magic through and through, a device that jumps out of the shadows, spins you around 180 degrees, and sends you back whence you came with a swift kick to the ass. It's intoxicating, and learning its name made me find it more so, not less. The first device I remember pattern recognizing in rap was the simile. I'm coming after you like the letter V, which is a line that I talk about early and often in the book. And ever since, I've thrilled to the discovery and identification of countless other verbal tricks, like antinaclysis and zeugma, and solipsis and anaphora, and garden path sentences, and bewildering uses of the expletive it, which is like the 808 cowbell of rap vernacular. I'll explain why some other time. It occurs to me, though, that I almost never hear these terms thrown around by rappers themselves, even the ones who are outspoken about their craft, who hold forth on their rhetorical strategies in genius interviews or in Paul Edwards' How to Rap series, don't appear to have much interest in the terminological and taxonomic metadata. I'm kind of into the real technical part of it, Eminem tells Ice-T in documentary Something from Nothing, after a full minute haltingly describing his approach to rhyming, during which time the most specialized term he uses is sandwich.
I know you're going to keep reading that section, and I love the second half of that section, but we're pressed enough that I think we probably, if we're going to try to get to one more song, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get to one more song, but
that's also true. How would you like to proceed?
What was the part that you wanted me to?
Oh, it made me think of, so when you were explaining that, like, your mom might be on the Zoom and that's not ideal, etc. It made me think of the section on page 185 where you are talking about, well, here it starts, it's a horrible lesson indeed, that paragraph.
Yeah.
Is that something you'd be comfortable reading out of context?
Sure. Yeah, so this is the end of a chapter called On Values. It's just sort of about how rap routinely compels me to question these things that I assumed my values were. Like a song that's about selling drugs or about murdering people that, like, even though I morally disapprove, I find so magnetic and am able to listen to over and over without sort of processing the despair that you might expect that I should. So the end of this chapter is, it's a horrible lesson indeed, as J. Electronica says, but it has to be learned. That language, sublime as it can be, is not values, is not righteousness, is not truth. That there are people, not just personas, but people, who are ignorant and immoral and inhuman, and who use language the way I imagine angels would, if angels were interesting. That language is pure, but we are not, magical because we are not, omnipotent so we don't have to be. A reasonable person may be vulnerable to seduction and sinister persuasion by guile and beauty, but guile and beauty have no morality of their own. Beauty may be truth, but truth can still be ugly. It can still hurt, maybe even for no reason. The how does not cancel the what. Words are holy, but do not confer holiness, only sense.
I kind of think that to me, that paragraph sums up so much of what you talk about in the book. You know, the falling in love with language, even in times when you feel like you're not the target audience, or you're not the, just finding all this beauty in the way language is put together in these songs that you love. To me, it's just really fun and exciting to read as a music fan, to have somebody articulate it in that way. But I think it speaks to the idea that spending a chapter talking about Biggie's dick, and having that be one thing, one pillar of the song, and the other pillar, the braggadocio of it, and having the other pillar of it be the beautiful way that it's constructed and that it's executed.
Yeah, and just, I mean, that you're absolutely right, that's a recurring tension that I feel like, for me, the big tension is that I don't experience it as more of a tension. Is that, like, I feel like I have no trouble reconciling the fact that it's just this beautifully wrought language act, and also talking about something that's wildly graphic, too much information, or wildly, like, ethically reprehensible, and that those two things can coexist is so fascinating, and so just such a compelling place to kind of spend time wandering around and calling into question your own presuppositions.
Yeah, and not to say that the book, obviously rap and hip hop songs like go over a million different subjects and a million different things, but in your sort of like trinity of artists, there are definitely a fair amount, not trinity, but your family of artists, there are definitely a fair amount of them who are almost laser focused on what it is to sell drugs, or what it is to be engaged in violent acts, sometimes for survival, sometimes to get ahead,
For sure, yeah. I mean, like, I would argue that some of the rappers whose careers are almost exclusively just about, or at least the beginning of their careers were almost exclusively about selling drugs. And I'm thinking of Lil Wayne, I'm thinking of Clips. Jay-Z less so, although he raps a lot about selling drugs. Same with Biggie. That, like, they're so, not only are they just extraordinary, like, they have these otherworldly talents, Lil Wayne especially, who I can't wrap my head around how good he is with language. And another thing I talk about in the book is how he appears to have just zero interest in talking about language as a tool. But that they're also, like, I just find them so much more interesting than people who are rapping about positive values, about, like, bolstering the community, about uplifting listeners and being good to each other. And I don't know if that's because the fact that they're rapping about things that are immoral with a capital I lends a certain frisson to the language, like whether that's something external to the composition itself that is spicing it up for me, or whether it's tapping into something much older, like where I say, in the part that I just read, I talk about how they use language like I imagine angels would if angels were interesting, which is kind of a callback to a point I make earlier about Paradise Lost, where like everyone I've ever spoken to, myself included, everyone I've ever spoken to who's read Paradise Lost is like, yeah, like, I mean, God is cool, but God is kind of a dullard in that book. Like the devil is an interesting character.
Right.
Like, that's
right.
like, that's a super compelling dynamic.
Right. And it makes me think of when people get angry at the evening news and say that they wish there were more good news stories, you know, and then but you know the ratings would like plummet like crazy because nobody would tune in to hear about, you know, neighborhood cat saved from tree. Although I guess that's kind of what like Upworthy tried to do and what certain, you know, Instagram channels are dedicated to, but maybe it's just more interesting. The bad news is
that seems like a really good segue into the Merce song that you suggested. Do you want to listen to that right quick?
Do we have time? You have a few questions coming in, so I don't know if we should. Let's listen to like a little smidge of it, because it's positive.
Yeah,
it's not about a dick.
Like lest the people who are watching, who don't listen to much rap, think that they're like it's all sort of bottomed out zero social conscience. Like there is another side to rap that is also extremely compelling. I'm not trying to like compare the two narrowly, but like there's a radically different, I guess, orientation toward
you can play it. We could play it, or we could drop a link in the Q&A. Either way.
Let's play like a minute or two.
All right, sounds good. And then we'll get to these questions.
Then we'll get to the questions. Thank you for your indulgence.
Which are really great so far.
Cool.
So I'm at the barbershop, and we're talking about this new generation of hip hop and how lost y'all are, man. But y'all have no science. So here you go. The systematic knowledge of the physical world gained through observation and experimentation. Usually beginning with a hypothesis of what some may call an estimation. Record your results from a series of tests. And what you're left with is a theory at best. Now let me give my hypothesis an educated guess on why my people on the whole seem to be such a mess. Genocide, deliberate extermination of a race, culture, or an entire nation. Centuries ago, they brought us here on a boat, enslaved us, beat us till our spirit was broke. Then they gave us freedom and a little bit of hope. Then they killed our leaders and they gave us dope. Crack from the CIA by way of Nicaragua. Shipped to Rick Ross, he's the black godfather. Now Oscar Blandon was his known supplier. He snitched on Rick so that he could retire. Ratted on Ricky so he got out quickly. Now this is where the situation gets a little sticky. Not a citizen of the USA. He was released and got hired by the DEA. Then he got his green card from the INS. But that shit never happened due to previous arrest. See, our government seems to think that there is the difference between powder cocaine and crack. For instance, you get 5 years for 5 grams of crack, but in the powder form you have 100 times that. Now who has the rock and who has the powder? Who's the oppressed and who has the power? They want you to fail, so you wind up in jail. You know how much they make while you're sitting in that cell? Billions of dollars for inmate facilities. You sell yourself back into slavery willingly. It's not black and white, it's so much more. It's rich staying rich and the poor staying poor. The poor whites meth, the poor blacks crack. It's not about race, and once you realize that, we as a nation are free to move on and become one people, a movement strong. We dropping this size, mercy, dropping this size. Mercy is a scientist.
To me, the funny thing is, like, I think it's a really interesting, fascinating, and like technically great song. And I also think that Murs is like a little bit of a libertarian, and some of the stuff in that song, I'm like, I don't know if I agree with everything Murs says in that song. But the second half of it is basically like the history of hip hop from, you know, house parties in New York to present day, and that's pretty fascinating too, constructed. But
it does tap in. There's like this sort of, it's a much rarer mode for rap, but there is this sort of like secret journalism, sort of secret history, or like not even secret,
that's
but
the Pharaoh Monty effect.
History of a lesson. You know, and there's the Killer Mike song about Ronald Reagan. There is obviously KRS-One did a lot of that, like a way of kind of I don't want to say Trojan horsing in because it's pretty explicit about what it's up to, but it's just sort of like presenting this insurgent thought in a really attractive package.
And so often it crosses over with what you talk about a lot in the book, which is like the 5%er philosophies that sometimes can border on conspiracy theory or be outright conspiracy theory. And so they're like political undertones and underground hip hop get really interesting, sometimes in amazing ways, sometimes in ways where you're like, I don't know. Lots. I would say there's probably nowhere else on earth where the phrase 9/11 was an inside job happens more than in underground hip hop.
It's probably true.
That's
any hip hop song that like has a lot of science imagery,
right?
Which this one does in a very cool way.
Yeah. Let's jump into some questions because we're getting towards the end of our hour, and so you'll be charged with answering these succinctly because I think we can get through them. I'm going to go for the most upvotes first, which let's start with a quick one. Scene report from Paris, French rap and hip hop. Do you find yourself zeroing in on French? You would argue this, but you're a fluent French speaker, and do you find yourself listening to a lot of French hip hop?
More and more, yeah. Like it's much less accessible in the sense that like. Well, I don't know. It's much less accessible in the sense that if you want to kind of get a primer in American hip hop, like the resources are very plentiful, and I don't find that's almost certainly because I'm not looking hard enough or in the right places. But for me, it's much more like I find an artist that I'm really into and kind of build outward from there. Like who is that artist appear on records with? I did some subtitling work for a French rapper for some of his videos and a documentary that just came out about his career, and so that was also kind of a cool source of exposure.
What's general? Do you have his name handy?
What'd you say?
Do you have his name handy so we can?
Yeah, his name is Orelsan. He's Orelsan.
Cool.
Very, very talented rapper. Cool, like very restless in a good way, like is always interested in trying new things, interpolating new styles. But there's a lot that's kind of bubbling up that I was gonna say I don't feel like I have a handle on it the way I do on American rap, but I also don't have a handle on American rap. Like it's too vast, and the older I get and the more I stay in the same place and the more like these new sort of SoundCloud subcultures keep bubbling up. Like I'm glad the book came out when it did, because I think it was starting to get away from me even more than it already had.
You do in the book, you talk about like you have kind of a sense of joy about the idea that as soon as this book is out, it's outdated and people have moved on. And I found that really interesting. To me, there was like some giddiness in that aspect of it. Like it doesn't have to remain current because it's never going to be current because rap moves so fast.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's not sour grapes exactly, but like it was me coming to terms with the fact that no matter how hard I tried, by the time a book came out, it was going to be outdated. And just, yeah, I think you're right, trying to celebrate that as opposed to lamenting it, because it is something that moves so fast that all you can really do is try to like sort of mark or commemorate, let's say, some things that I feel what I describe in this preface as like the things that seem to me to be timeless. With any luck will be of relevance, be like pertinent, if not totally accurate to whatever rap becomes in 10 years and 20 years. I know that was a terrible answer to the question about French rap. Alpha One is a great rapper who I recommend highly, and I'll leave it at that.
Alpha and then Juan spelled
WANN.
Okay, sweet.
That is his real name.
We got a couple things to Google. That's pretty good. Let's see. I'm going to go lightning round through. Have any rappers reached out to you since your book came out. It's so freshly out that I would be
It's so
surprised,
freshly,
but
yeah, no, not yet. I'm hopeful that that it'll get on some desks.
are you, is part of you like, I kind of hope I get involved in like a battle, like just I kind of hope that somebody just thinks I should die? Is part of you feeling that?
Not a part that I'm aware of.
Okay. Just curious. I guess I have a death wish myself.
Maybe if it was like a rapper that I really didn't like.
Yeah, right. I'm not gonna say, I don't think that you don't really like LL Cool J, but LL Cool J always comes up in the funniest ways in this book, where I feel like he's clearly not your top 10 for life, but
he's not my top 10, but
he comes up.
Cool J.
Yeah, he's a very strange and
like,
great
my mom
character.
was on this Zoom call and my mom said to knock you out, LL Cool J.
Let me see. We've got 2 other questions up here. One other question. I think one just went away. How about have you did you include any female rappers and their lyrics in this book? Which I know the answer to, but I will let you answer.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a, I don't want to say it was a struggle, but it was a project that I was conscious of trying to represent women in the book as equitably as possible, bearing in mind the fact that rap has long been overwhelmingly male, and as such, the majority of the corpus that I draw from is male also. There's a chapter about women in rap that is my attempt at kind of a capsule summary that also recommends other books that I think are better and more authoritative on that topic. But yeah, there are a lot of women throughout the book who I think are great.
You had not to throw the binary on things, but do you have a favorite female rapper of all time that springs to mind for you?
Of all time, I don't know. I love there's a rapper named Young M.A.
Mm-hmm.
who is just like she's so like devil may care. Mm-hmm. She's a gangster rapper. She's a kind of New York knucklehead gangster rap, but she's so clever and just so good, so endearing, that I just have like, she's still pretty early in her career, but I like can't wait to see where she goes.
Cool. Let's see. Anybody want to throw any last minute questions up into this chat? Oh wait, no, there is another one here. I'm sorry, and I really like this one actually. As both a writer and a fan of the genre, did or do you have any rapping aspirations? I thought about this a lot reading your book. I thought, whether privately or publicly, you have to have written some bars, even if they're just on a notes app on your phone. I
feel like I've written like 6 bars. in the decade or so that I've been working on this book. I think it's a question that I am really fascinated by, but don't have a good answer, which is like, why don't I write raps? Like, it seems like it's right there. It seems like something that I've like been marinating in this language play for such a long time, that you would think I would be able to start, if not imitating it, then just sort of like get my own ideas about how to turn it into production. And I don't know if it's that I don't want to, or I don't feel like I have like the je ne sais quoi required to, like, maybe I could be a ghostwriter. I was
gonna say, yeah, the writing and the performing could be 2 different things.
Maybe I could write lyrics for Casey,
For me, you think I should be the performer?
I think you should. I think you're the charismatic.
Yeah, we'll see. You dig hard enough, you might find a Casey Jarman rap somewhere in the archives.
But yeah, no, like I don't have. I definitely wouldn't say I have aspirations. I will say that I wouldn't be surprised if, like, 40 years from now, if you dug a little bit, you would find a Levin Becker rap somewhere.
Yeah. Do you have a rap name at least? I'm gonna get to one more question before we run, but
my rap name. Oh, Cumbersome Q.
Cumbersome Q?
Yeah.
I'm not even gonna ask the context. I think that should just live on its own. Let's see. We have one from Anne. Your first book was about Ulipo. a French literary group of which you're a member. Do you think of rap as Oulipan? Is that how I would say that? That is, does it use constraints in order to play with language? Oulipian? Oulipian, my bad.
Yeah, so like the 15-second capsule summary, the Oulipo is this French group that embraces constraint as a way of generating literature. So everything from novels that are mapped out by a sophisticated algorithm that determines how characters behave to a book that Georges Perec wrote without using the letter E. I think there's some examples of rappers using constraints openly, like Gift of Gab, who was the MC for a group called Black Alicious, who died last year, has a song called Alphabet Aerobics, which is like this mind-boggling exercise where, like, for a while he raps only words that start with A, and then he goes into the B's, and then he goes into the C's. And I think that kind of conceit pops up from time to time, but I don't tend to think of rap as a constrained form globally any more than any other kind of songwriting is. Like, it has conventions, it has, relationships to rhyme and storytelling and things like that are, I think, conventionalized, but that I wouldn't call constraints in like an all-encompassing way.
I did feel like I could draw a pretty clear line reading your book between your love for language as, as a puzzle, as an exercise, like just a brain exercise, into hip hop lyricism, where like you're really identifying, maybe it's not that overt of a constraint, but it's like, an invented meter or like just ways of rhyming that you would never have thought of. Like, it does seem like it's a big part of your enjoyment of looking at lyrics closer.
Yeah, and that's sort of the continuation of where I stopped reading the Intelligences chapter, where I talk about like so many rappers are these phenomenal inventive users of language, and it puzzles me a little bit that they don't want to talk about it that way. I mean, some do, like some rappers are happy to.
Jay-Z, right? Like Jay-Z talks a lot about it. You talk to him.
Yeah, Jay-Z has a book called Decoded, where it's a memoir, but he also annotates a lot of his lyrics, and he's very happy to kind of toot his own horn he talks about his triple entendres a lot. But I think some, like, Lil Wayne is a really great example that, like, the things he can do without any apparent desire to sort of discuss the formal aspect of what he does, and allegedly without ever even writing down his lyrics. Like, the things he can do with words and with echoes and with different meanings of the same word, like, are, I think, mathematically diagrammable. Like, they're so complex and yet so structured that if you were to try to replicate, like, you could take a Lil Wayne rhyme, a certain kind of Lil Wayne rhyme, and take it as take it as a ready-made form and try to replicate it and use that as a constraint. That's a very Oulipian thing to do. But it's endlessly fascinating to me that he could both be so skilled and so uninterested in kind of claiming and owning that angle of looking at those skills.
Well, we are about at the end of our time. I'm tempted to try to squeeze in 2 paragraphs of a reading. I don't know how Powell is feeling about that. What do you think?
Maybe a short one, yeah, that would be great.
A little graph or 2, just because we did such a short reading. I wondered, Daniel, if you, because we were gonna have you read On Possession with Intent to Sell, and would it feel weirdly out of context to just read the last couple graphs of that, or the last paragraph of that?
Of which? Of Possession?
Yeah, on 239.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's just another beautiful passage.
So yeah, this is at the end of a suite of chapters where I'm talking about, like, the life that rap lyrics lead outside of rap songs. So, like, they get printed on T-shirts and they get used in Twitter memes and such. And I talk about possession in the chapters leading up to this as a way of describing the way that rap lyrics kind of haunt me and inhabit me, and like how sometimes when I repeat them to myself or write about them or copy them down, transcribe them, that's a way of trying to like access something that you can possess about these lyrics. Wu-Tang's Cream is a brick wall covered in spray-painted gossip, a grammar workbook printed on post-consumer pulp, a goofy 5%er backronym that happened to land in a dope song. Seriously, imagine it to the tune of I've been working on the railroad. Cream stands for cash rules everything around me. And become a statement iconic enough to both affirm and eclipse itself. Cash rules everything around music, says Future. Cash rules everything except me, says the Canadian rapper Socrates. Cash ruins everything around me, I grumble to myself when I'm feeling spiteful about self-employment tax or YouTube rap video censorship, or gentrification in neighborhoods where I'm not directly responsible for it. Cats rule everything around me, says a shirt you could at one point buy from a website called Rap T-shirts for White People. Cookies rule everything around me, proclaims the name of a chain of ice cream shops in California, which people just call Cream, I think. I've never been able to bring myself to go, though I can't explain convincingly why not. I'm pretty sure it's wrong of me to begrudge these contagious bits of language the long, strange lives they go on to lead in a wealth of contexts and colors and shapes. The attention and goodwill and money they may or may not accrue back to the people who coined them. Wrong, or at least unnecessary. Generous as it is as an ethos, rap has been a culture industry inscribed intimately and enthusiastically under Cash's rules since before I was born. These words didn't become commodities when someone thought to print them on a t-shirt. They became commodities when someone wrapped them into the microphone in exchange for real or cultural or social or sexual capital. Just because I'm loath to part with the stones in my pocket, which is another metaphor I use for lyrics that I'm obsessed with, doesn't mean they're not products, doesn't mean they're immune from the undertow of capitalism. Still, for no one's sake but my own, something in me hopes there's a difference, one that really matters, between possession and possession with intent to sell. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Always lovely seeing you and chatting
Casey,
with you.
A huge pleasure as always. Thank you so much, Powell's.
Thank you, Powell.
Thank you both. That was great. Wish we could go longer. Just to remind everyone, yeah, thanks for being here. You can get What's Good at pals.com. And we do have signed book plates sent by City Lights. So you get one of those with your purchase. While you're at pals.com, look at our upcoming events and we'll see you at one of those. But thank you once again, Daniel and Casey. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.